As business owners, how do we know we're working on the right thing? And more importantly, how do we know our employees are working on the right things that will actually produce the results that we're looking for? Today, we have an expert to help us discover how to actually make every minute of every hour of every day count for both us and our employees and drive us towards our true objective. And I'm very grateful at the Wealth Ability Show here today to have Josh Seiden, who is an expert in the area of OKR. If you don't know what OKR is, you are going to know soon. Josh wrote the book, Who Does What by How Much? Who Does What by How Much? And this is a bit of a tongue twister, but it's so important to understand. I mean, it really kind of brings it out. Who does what and by how much? So how productive are we, and how productive are we throughout the day? So Josh, welcome to the Wealth Ability Show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So Josh, if you could just give us a little of your background and how you came to be the expert on OKR.
Yeah. So, I've spent most of my career working with technology teams, first in Silicon Valley, and then really broadly across the world. And one of the things I came to understand is that, it's hard to make great products. And it's hard because building great technology is hard. But the other thing that's hard for tech teams is it's hard to make products that actually work for people. So sometimes they get lost in the technical challenges of building stuff. And then when they put it out in the world, they discover they've built a thing that nobody wants. And it turns out that lesson applies whether you're in the technology world or whether you work very far from technology. How do we know that the stuff that we're working hard on and that's hard to do, how do we know that stuff is really creating value for our businesses and our customers? And that's sort of what led me to OKRs, which is kind of a system for helping us deal with those questions.
All right, so let's go right to it. What does OKR stand for? It's OKR.
That's right. So OKR stands for objectives and key results. And so the idea here is that as a leader, we might want to ask our people to achieve an objective, right? Here's our goal. And so that objective is a statement of a strategically important goal for us, okay? And then the next part is that key result, KR. And the key result helps us measure our progress and tells us whether we are making progress towards our goal, whether we're achieving our goal, and it should tell us when we've hit our goal.
So let me ask you a question. So when you talk about objectives, okay, are you talking about like a specific end result, or are you talking about a big picture objective?
It's a big picture objective. So it's something like, the Cleveland Clinic, which is, one of the leading healthcare providers in the US, they run their business with OKRs. And so one of their objectives is the best place to receive care. Right? Best place to receive care. So that's a high level, it's almost a mission, right? But it's an objective, it's a vision. Okay, that's great. What in the world does that mean? What does it mean to be the best place to receive care? Well, they measure it, right? They measure it through their success rate with patients. They measure it through the safety that patients experience. They measure it through the outcomes, the health outcomes of their patients. And those are expressed as the key results.
Got it. So the key results are really the specifics, whereas the objective is more of the vision of what we expect. I mean, let me give you an example. So let me give you my example, right?
Okay.
So our objective is to help people throughout the world become financially free of Wall Street, government, and their employers. That's our objective. is
Yeah.
become financially free of those three groups. So that would be the objective. That's that big picture objective. And then you've got to break that down into key results, right?
Exactly. And so then, and that's where the title of the book comes in. So then we say, okay, well, when people are financially free, what are they doing differently? In other words, who, right? Who are these people? Does what? What are they doing? And by how much? How can we measure that? So, and if we can answer those questions, we can tell that we're making progress towards our objective. So who does what by how much? Those are our key results. And usually for an objective, we're looking for, a set of 3 to 5 key results that are the kind of critical things that we're trying to influence that make this stuff concrete.
Okay, so you start with so you let's say as a leadership team or as a company, you come up with these 3 to 5 key results. Okay, this is how, for example, a customer would measure that I've reached the goal of being financially free of the government, for example, and et cetera, et cetera. How do you bring that down to the day-to-day world?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so typically what you have is you have OKRs at a high level for the organization. And what those do is those kind of capture your strategy, right? Um, and there's typically a handful of those for an organization, right? There might be a market-facing one, there might be an operational one for, how, like another important objective for the Cleveland Clinic. Um, I think, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have it in front of me, but it's like the best place to work in healthcare, right? Right. So we want our patients to experience great care, but we also want our people to experience a great workplace. So typically an organization will have a small set of those. And then those kind of you've got OKRs at each level in the organization that is important. So you might go to your next level down and say, look, these are the company OKRs, right? What can your team, what can your work group do to contribute to helping people be financially free? And it might be that the marketing group takes a look at that and says, well, you know what? We think there's an educational component here, right? And they might set OKRs around some very important focus initiative for education. And it might be that the different parts of the organization sort of lean into those OKRs and people create their own. So the teams in the organization kind of pick them up and and say kind of this is how we believe we can best contribute to this initiative. And then you get kind of alignment through the organization because everybody has an OKR that points up to the high level OKR.
So and it's both the objective and the key results. So in other words,
Exactly.
there's a subset objective.
Yeah.
Like HR has a subset objective. We want this to be a great workplace. That's the
Yeah.
subset objective for HR, say, for example. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's a subset of the general of the bigger objective of this is the best place to get healthcare, right? This what
Exactly.
that
Right.
big picture objective. So everybody's got them on the way down. So then do you get as granular as individual employees have those?
You stop at the individual level, right? So the smallest unit that you do this for is at the team level. What starts to happen is if you start to do it at the individual level, you create these kind of you start to create incentives that don't line up to the organizational incentive, and they start to line up to individuals' incentives, and it starts to pull things in bad directions. So what you really want, the great thing about OKRs is that when they're working well, they create this kind of alignment, right? You opened the show by talking about, are people working on the right things, right? So we want everybody to be pulling in the same direction. So we create alignment. And then there are some other things that it does for the organization. There are mechanisms for creating transparency. We're reporting on these results on a continuous basis, and some other benefits. But the key point here is we're trying to create alignment so we don't go as far as the individual level.
So I can see how this is super important for a big organization, right? Because
Yeah.
it's it's a bit like herding cats, right? So you've got to break this down. How does that translate to a small organization? I mean, let's say you've got a company with 10 employees. How does that translate down? Do you just have fewer OKRs?
Yeah.
Is that how it translates down so that people are working on just their specific, maybe there might be two teams instead of, 20?
Exactly. Exactly. The point is, I think one of the one of the positives that you get here, right, is that a lot of the times when we set our goals, right, we set our goals in sort of these sort of big, vague things like the best place to receive healthcare. Okay, what do I do with that, right?
Right.
Or we set our goals. You often see organizations set their goals in revenue, right? So we're going to grow our business by X% this year, and we're going to hit this number. Everybody go hit this number. Well, what do I do as an individual contributor on that team? How do I take a revenue target and work on that, right? Now, as a salesperson, that might be relatively clear. But what if I'm in another function in the company, right? Well, the value here is that we look at that question and say, okay, well, when we're doing X in revenue, who does what by how much? What are our customers doing differently, right? Who's our customer? What are they doing differently, and by how much? Maybe we're a retail business, and our focus is on increasing foot traffic to the store, right? Okay, that's a key result, right? Maybe we've got an online business, and the focus is on referrals, right? People are going to tell a friend, repeat, or they're going to be repeat customers. First time shoppers will make a second purchase within the next 6 months, right? Who does what by how much? And so it gives us something really tangible to work on. We can start to tell a story about what our customers are doing. And it starts to break that kind of important target, right? It's not wrong to set revenue targets. It's just those are hard to work with. What do we do to operationalize them, right? And so this gives us a way of telling a story about the people in our company and the people in our customers population. And we tell those stories and we say, what are they doing that creates value for them? What are they doing that creates value for us? And how do we get them to do more of those things?
So this discussion reminds me a little of PERT. I'm sure you're familiar with PERT, which is what they used to get a man on the moon, right? Where they said, okay, we have somebody stepping on the moon. What happened right immediately before that? What happened immediately before that? What happened immediately before that? Right. And they actually backed into it. That's actually how they bit off. That's how they ate the elephant of getting somebody to the moon. Right.
Yeah.
One little piece at a time. And so they were looking at those objectives. This sounds similar, but maybe in a
Yeah.
forward looking as opposed to a backward looking.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can tell those stories in either direction, right? You can say, okay, we've got a customer who walks into our store, right? What do they do just before they purchase, right? We want them to buy a thing. What do the customers do just before they purchase? Okay, and what do they do before that? And what do they do before that? So you can tell that story backwards, or you can tell that story forwards. And then when you have that story laid out, you can say, which of those things do we think, because we're not sure, right? Which of those things do we think create value? And which of those things do we think there's opportunity to kind of work on and improve?
Right.
Right.
And I would presume which of those things can we actually impact? Because some of those
Right.
things we might not have any impact on, right? It's like
Exactly.
what happened at home that morning, right? We don't get to impact that. But
Right.
we do get to impact what happens once they walk into the store, or we might even be able to what got them to walk in the store in the first place.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. So that's exactly the point, right? We're looking at what do we have control over, or what do we have influence over that we can do and we find those things through like telling these stories.
So how do you let's delve into that a little bit. How do you actually get to creating that OKR system?
Mm. Um, so there's a couple of things about OKRs that we talk about in the book. And so we say, OKRs are a goal setting system, right? Right. They're a way of
Right.
expressing your goals. And we can talk about how we write them, right? And then OKRs are sort of a process. I mean, there's a thing called the OKR cycle, which is a rhythm of meetings that we use to talk about our progress and hold each other accountable. And then the last thing is that OKRs are a culture, right? And so we have, um, a certain kind of culture that supports working in this way towards a goal, right? And so um, you asked me about how do we set up the system? It starts with writing. It starts with that first question of how do we write down our goals? And so the first thing that we do is we say, look, what's our big strategy? What's our strategic challenge this year? Right? What are we trying? What's our most important goal, and what are the most important obstacles? And so we might say something like, well, we're strong in we've got a good local business in New York City. I'm based in New York, right? And we really think there's potential to grow this beyond New York. So what do we need to do in order to our strategy is to grow this to neighboring Northeast states, right? As a kind of a first step to becoming a national brand. Okay, so this year we're going to grow to neighboring Northeast states. What are the big obstacles to doing that? Right. And so we would ask those questions. What's our strategic goal? What are the big obstacles? And then we would set our first OKR around kind of addressing what we believe are those obstacles. Right?
Got it.
And so that's really just a conversation with leadership and with the team to develop that point of view, right? And it can be quite rigorous or it can be relatively informal, depending on the size of the business and how big a bet you want to make, you know. Um, and then once that's done, there's a process of kind of socializing that in the organization, and depending on the size of the organization, having people at each level kind of contribute their OKRs for their level.
So, so you say in your book that a successful OKR system starts with prioritizing your clients or your customers' needs. What do
Yeah.
you mean by that?
So, we almost called the book "Everyone Has a Customer," right? And and I think that in large organizations, it's really easy to feel like, well, I'm a person who doesn't work with customers. What do you mean we prioritize the customer? Right? I work in HR, or I work in facilities, or I work in the legal group, right? And even in small organizations, many of us can feel like the customer is kind of far away. Well, salespeople talk to the customer, but I don't, right? Our point of view is that um, in your work, there's a person who is directly consuming your work and who benefits when you do a good job. So if I'm the HR manager, who's my customer? My customer is another manager in the business who's trying to hire an employee. Or my customer is the employee who has questions about his or her vacation policy. Or my customer is a candidate applying for a job. Those people are my customers. Now, they're not signing a check for the business, but if I treat them as a customer, right, it gives me an opportunity to kind of to do a better job on their behalf, create value for us, create value for them. And so that's the first thing is to understand in that who does what by how much, who's my who's my customer, right? And and then how do I make that person successful? And by doing so, make the business successful, right? And so that's where the focus of that storytelling starts, right? Is by understanding who our customers are, and then really trying to become the world's foremost expert on your personal customer.
So I've noticed that several times you've referenced storytelling.
Yeah.
Uh, Tell us about that.
Well, I guess that may just be sort of the way I approach the world is that I like to tell stories and I'm a writer, so I'm a storyteller. But I really think that in those when we tell stories, right? Uh, so much interesting stuff comes out, right? One of the kind of I spent a lot of my time in the early part of my career doing customer research, user research, market research, helping companies understand who their customers were. And one of the best questions you can ask a customer is you can ask them to tell you a story. Say, tell me about the last time you shopped at our store, right? That's a really different question than what do you think of our store? You ask somebody, what do you think of our store? They're gonna they're not gonna tell you they're gonna say, oh, Josh, I love your store. What are they gonna say? Right? Maybe everyone in 10 will tell you something like, oh, well, here's what I don't like about your store. But if you say, well, tell me about the last time you came into our store, right?
But
What'd you
tell me
come
the
in
story.
for? Tell me the story. Exactly. Well, I came in for oranges and you didn't have any oranges. And I was frustrated. So I went across the street to your competitor. Do you shop for oranges often? Well, no, mostly I don't shop for oranges. Mostly I come in your store for the pharmacy section or whatever it is. You start to get into the details of what motivates people, what they're trying to do, and where you might be able to do it better, you know? And so I just think that storytelling people are natural storytellers. They may not think of themselves that way, but when we get people telling stories,
No.
all kinds of great stuff
It's why
happens.
social media thrives.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
why. It's because everybody has a story. Everybody likes telling stories, and everybody's interested in stories. Stories, we remember stories. We don't
Yeah,
remember facts and figures. We remember stories,
exactly.
right?
Exactly.
That's what we remember. So you talked about the who.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the what. So
Okay.
how do you actually determine what is the right work for employees?
So that's the art. That's hard, right? And so at the beginning, we might not be sure, right? So we tell a story about what does a customer do when they come to our website, or what does a customer do when they come to our store? We probably have imperfect information, right? And one customer is not like the next customer is not like the next customer. So we have a bunch of stories that we have to make sense of, and we have to kind of find the patterns in. So we sort of start by looking at the story. We lay it out. Sometimes when I work with teams and with clients, we we just use post-it notes on a wall, and we just put them on a wall and we tell the story, you know. And then we say, what do we think is valuable? Now, sometimes what's valuable just because it's common sense, right? So if you're in a retail business, foot traffic is valuable, right? More foot traffic, generally speaking, is better for your retail locations. Right? So some of that stuff is not controversial. Some of that stuff you have unique data about your business. You know that customers who come in having clipped your ad out of the newspaper or whatever it is, those customers are more likely to convert to paying customers. I'm using a lot of retail examples, but I think folks listening can apply that to their business. So there's some stuff that's common sense. There's some stuff that we may have data on, and then there's some stuff that's just a guess. It's a hunch, and that's one of the cool things about OKRs is we can start with a hunch and then go see if we're right or wrong. And in fact, OKRs are really, really good when we don't know the answer, right?
How
They're
so?
really, well, because we might say, like, okay, look, we know that foot traffic is good. What's the best way to increase foot traffic? I don't know, right? Should we put an ad in the paper? Should we build a big sign? Should we put a billboard on the highway? Those all seem like credible ideas. And I'm sure everybody's had the experience of being in a meeting where we argue about whose idea is best, right? And those meetings, when you're in a meeting like that, what it means is none of us actually know. We're making a pretty good case, but none of us actually know. And so what do we do in that case? Well, we don't want to decide in that moment, for example, that we're going to spend a year's budget on billboards, right? So how could we test that? Well, we might say, well, our OKR for this quarter is to grow foot traffic by 25%. Let's try some small experiments and see which one of those tactics actually moves our key result. Okay. Well, we're going to try, we'll spend a month doing billboard advertising on a small section of road, right? And we'll spend a month doing local media ads. We'll spend a month doing whatever the other tactic is, right? And we'll see like which one is actually generating results. And then in the next quarter, we might say, well, okay, look, it's really clear that one of these tactics has been successful for us. Now we can kind of focus in on that, right? So one of the things that OKRs, you might notice, OKRs say, here's our goal, here's how we measure it. They don't tell us what the solution is. And so that's a really key element of OKRs because it sort of asks our people to use their creativity to solve the problem, right? OKRs they're really kind of almost a question and not an answer.
They're really looking for, here's the result I want. I'm not telling you how to get it.
Exactly.
Which I think I actually think that's a very important part for employees. First of all, I think most employees would like that. Because they get to use their creativity. And second of all, you're actually encouraging creativity. And I find that a lot of times there are systems like school systems, like even some family systems that actually, and certainly a lot of employment systems that actually discourage creativity. Well, you must do it this way. I mean, you think about the term process and procedure. Process and procedure is let's do it the same way every time.
Right.
You know, and the goal is good because it's consistency, right? That's the goal, is to get some consistency. That's what a machine is all about. A machine is doing the same thing over and over and over again. So how do you manage getting the consistency, which is the policy and procedure, versus the creativity, which is what I want as the result? I mean, take myself. I don't do well with policies and procedures. I'm not a rules type of a guy, even though I'm an accountant, but that's kind of like weird that I am. But I don't really like, the rules are like, okay, those are the rules, but what if I get to it a different way? Is that okay? As long as I get the result, right? But I'm going to naturally fight that. A lot of people won't. They will just, okay, this is what we're told to do. We're told to do it this way, and they won't challenge that. So how do you balance those two? I have actually found that in my business very, very challenging.
Yeah. Well, I think that there are different kinds of problems that, we use different kinds of methods on, right? So there are problems where we kind of know the answer, right? And we know that doing it the same way every time, we figured out the best way to do it. And we want to just do it that way because we know that way gets us good results. So I don't know if you've ever been in a small plane where you can sit next to the pilot.
Oh yeah.
But pilots have a checklist that they work from, right? These are highly trained, very skilled people, but they have a checklist in the cockpit. And before they take off, they go down their checklist and they make sure that they're following, we'll call it policy and procedure, but this is important. And we know that the right answer is in this checklist. You got to do it every time because your life is on the line. Then there are other kinds of problems where we don't know what the best answer is. It's like that foot traffic example I gave you. There's no policy and procedure for creating foot traffic, right? So that's a place where creativity is really the premium. I don't want my pilot to be creative in the routine takeoff, right? I mean, there's a place for that, creative problem solving in midair, but
if you're landing in the Potomac, you need to problem solve.
Right, right. My landing gear goes out. What do I do?
Right.
Right. There's probably some procedures there. I'm not a pilot, so I don't know. But yeah, so I think these kind of different kinds of problems, um, you know, require these sort of different approaches. Yeah. And so OKRs, just to kind of take that back to OKRs, we don't use OKRs for everything, right? So you don't describe all of the work that you need to do in your business with an OKR. Typically we tell teams you should have one OKR. It's for your most important priority. Go ahead and measure the rest of your business. That's important, but that's the business as usual stuff. That's the stuff you are need to keep the lights on, right? But our focus is usually a hard problem that we don't know how to solve,
Got it.
right? And that's where OKRs are
So
really
it
great.
sounds like the OKR, you use the OKR where you need the creativity. And
Yeah.
then where you don't need the creativity, that's where you use your policies and procedures.
Yeah. I think that's a great summary. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. All right. So if a business owner wanted to undertake going through setting up the whole OKR system, what are maybe the first 2 or 3 steps you would suggest they take?
Yeah. Well, we actually lay this out step by step in the book. But the sort of the first question I think for entrepreneur is to say, why do I want to do this? What improvement am I hoping to see in my business? Am I trying to create clarity? Am I trying to create alignment? Right. And then because I think people are resistant to new ways of working. And so it's often the case that if you go to the people in your business and say, guess what, folks, we're doing OKRs this year. I think there's a tendency where there's the possibility that people will go, oh no, here comes another management fad, right? Last year was X and this year it's OKRs, right? And so part of it is why. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to get better at, right? And being able to tell that story, I think, is an important first step. Then, right, having sort of done that self-reflection, then the question is, what's our strategy? What is our focus for the year? If we achieve only one big goal this year, what's it going to be? Right? And being able to, it's really hard for entrepreneurs, right, to say no and to have that focus, right? Some customer comes knocking at the door and says, we could do this with you. How do you know to say yes or no to that customer when opportunity comes knocking? And so having that strategy and clarity about what's our big focus for the year, right? And then we sit down and we say, okay, what's the obstacle to achieving that? And that's when we start to we turn our obstacle into a positive state, right? So we want to expand to our neighboring states. Well, nobody's heard of our brand. That's our biggest obstacle. Nobody's heard of us. Nobody cares about us. Nobody knows that Josh's Burger Shop makes the greatest cheeseburger in New York, right? So our big obstacle is brand awareness, right? Our focus might be telling our brand story more broadly, something like that, right? And then as an organization, we lean into that and we get that story told, right? And then we express that as our objective. And then we say, well, okay, if we're doing that well, how do we know? Right? Who does what by how much? Well, it might be editors of food magazines are, doing feature stories of us. Influencers are coming from other states to visit our restaurant. So that's kind of the process. Why are we doing it? What's our strategy? What's our obstacle? What does success look like when we've cleared that obstacle?
I love it. I love it. And I love the subtitle to the book, Practical Guide to Customer-Centric OKRs. We have a saying on our team that it's clients first.
Yeah.
We're client driven, so it's clients first. And I've noticed people talking about that more. So my final question is why the customer centric approach? Because that is actually, I find, a kind of a turn in the world right now, is that I'm starting to see it in multiple industries, multiple professions, where people are starting to talk less about what's good for the business and more about what's good for the customer, and being customer centric or client centric. Why is that? And what's made that turn? Why that it's really a philosophical shift from what I've been seeing.
You know, I think it's really easy when we work inside organizations to take a sort of an inside out point of view, right? This is what we think. And now we're going to tell the market, here's what we think. One of my first jobs, I worked in Silicon Valley. I worked with an incredibly smart team of engineers, and they would dream up features. It'd be cool. It'd be cool if we did this. And everybody would look around the table and go, yeah, that'd be cool. Right. And so we would build these things and put them in the market, and people wouldn't understand them. They didn't understand them. They didn't value them. They called our tech support line and they were like, what is going on with this thing you've just given me? Right. And so that's the inside out point of view. It'd be cool. It'd be cool if. Well, people don't necessarily have the same point of view that you do. And so our work is to take those good ideas, and we have lots of good ideas in the organization, and to find the intersection of, it's not just what we think is cool. It's what our clients think is cool. It's what our clients think is valuable. It's what our customers think is valuable. And when we find the intersection, that's where the business really succeeds.
Got it.
And
that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's really the point of the book. I think there are a number of books on OKRs out there, and I think there are a number of good ones. I think the unique point of view that we're bringing to this is really how to put that customer in the center of this whole system.
I love it. Again, the book is Who Does What by How Much. Subtitle is A Practical Guide to Customer-Centric OKRs. Website is okr-book.com. Is that right?
That's right.
Good job on getting that URL. That's since there are other OKR books. That's great. okr-book.com. And any place else we could go to get more about your work, Josh?
Yeah, sure. There are links on that site to my personal site, which is my name, joshseiden.com. And with my partner, we run a business called Sense and Respond Learning, which you can find at senseandrespond.co. And we offer training and consulting in OKRs and other related services.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Josh Seiden, Working Right, Who Does What by How Much. Highly recommend you get this book if you're a business owner. If you're not a business owner, highly recommend you become a business owner, because what happens is business owners, I'm going to tell you, always make way more money and pay way less tax. We'll see you next time on the Wealth Ability Show.
Thanks, Tom.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.